Hi, this is Eddie Muller with Ann Hockens, Director of Communications for the Film Noir Foundation. We are back once again with a summertime installment of Ask Eddie and Ann. And we got everything done last time, Ann, so we're kind of starting fresh this week. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm enjoying my 3-day weekend.
Excellent, excellent. I'm doing well. Also, it's a little warm in my office. It's a very nice day here, a little bit warm, and then I'm getting myself prepared to, for the first time in, man, I don't know how long, return to the studio to record new stuff for Turner Classic Movies. So I will be doing that later this week. So that will be my first my first trip in well over a year. And I'm looking forward to it, not with slight trepidation, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
So next time I talk to you, I'll report back on how that all went.
Good. Okay. The first question is from Joe. With the continued uncertainty about live North City festivals, are you still considering more streaming-based festivals?
Well, it seems to be the first question of every installment that we do. Okay, the answer to that is yes, we are of course considering it. The minute things started to open up, my instinct was, let's just cool out on everything and come back strong, with a big gala reopening at the Castro Theater in January. I don't know yet that we're in a position to say that's exactly what's going to happen. And as for doing other streaming festivals, right now I would probably say those would be international films because it's just much, much easier to do that. And I would like to. It's very, very difficult to orchestrate things streaming right now in the United States with all of the jockeying for position amongst the owners of these films to figure out what they want to do with what they call content, what I call movies and they call content. So we tried to set up a few of those and it wasn't as, it's never easy, but it wasn't as cooperative as I thought it was going to be, just because of all the entanglements right now with streaming rights to things. Do these companies that own them want to reserve the films for their own streaming services? Are they trying to license package deals to specific streaming services? So just trying to get films for one-off festivals online is very, very difficult. At least that's the case with American titles. The international films, they're happy when you want to show them.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you want to show our movie? Great. Here's fine. Go right ahead. So that's kind of the situation. So I expect that we will do more streaming, but it will probably be foreign language films.
And this is from Larry. When are we going to see Blu-ray releases of the Film Foundation's restorations of the several Argentine film noirs, such as Bitter Stems, Vampiro Negro, etc.?
Very soon. We are, I'm showing Los Tallos Amargos on July 17th on TCM. The film has been scanned. It has been freshly subtitled with new subtitles. We're working on the special features. So all of that will be coming, I hope, before the end of the year. That and The Beast Must Die. Those are the two that are going to be coming out from Flickr Alley first, and then we'll see what happens after that.
And this one's from Francesca. Eddie, how did you happen to write Grindhouse, the forbidden world of adults-only cinema? Because we think of you as the czar of noir, not the czar of Grindhouse.
That was the book that opened up the publishing business for me. It was published by St. Martin's Griffin, which was their trade paperback division of St. Martin's Press way back in, I think it was 1997, I think, that I published that. I'm no dummy. I know that sex sells. And that was also a part of film history that no one had really written much about. It's actually fairly common now. A lot of books have come out since then about the subject of, you know, sexploitation cinema or adults only cinema. But at that time, it was a pretty new thing. And the reason I did that is because at some point I had come across really a treasure trove of collateral material that was used to promote these films when they were when they were being distributed way back, like in the 30s and 40s, into the 50s and 60s. And there's a long story involved in how I discovered this material. There was a little bit of theft involved, so I don't want to go into too much detail. But I had the stuff and it was so fascinating that I said this would make an amazing book. And then I just had to research it and figure out what it all meant and what were these films. Then I had to find the films and do a little bit of dogged journalistic work, and then try to turn it into something that had some little bit of scholarly aspect to it, but not enough to kill the fun. And that was it. St. Martin's, I put together a 12-page proposal for it with some sample pages, and St. Martin's bought it like that. A guy named Gordon Van Gelder was the editor there, who was the son of the great Rudy Van Gelder. And anyway, that's how it came around. I might, at some point, I might actually see about republishing that book because the rights have reverted to me. And I probably wouldn't do the book in exactly the same way I did it before. It'd probably be in some other version. And I'm sure it would be, that book was entirely black and white. I'm sure a revised version would be in color since it isn't as expensive to do that now. But thank you for asking. But that's the story. I sometimes, it cracks me up when I think that some of the fans, some of my older, more conservative fans on TCM will stumble across that book at some point and lose their minds.
Would you like to talk about your book that is being republished?
Yes, Dark City, The Lost World of Film Noir. Hold on. Since I can do this now, this is it.
Yay.
This is that'll give you a sense of the hardcover. Yeah. Look at these beautiful end papers. Woohoo!
Woo!
So yes, this as they say, will street on July 6th.
Yeah, and I do have I got a preview copy, and it's beautiful. I mean, they did a beautiful, beautiful job on the book. It's gorgeous. Yeah. Okay, and this is from Michael. A couple of questions, one each for you. First for Eddie. In your return episode, you discussed Del Toro's upcoming remake of Nightmare Alley, one of my favorite noirs, despite the semi-upbeat ending tacked on by Zanuck. Do you think Del Toro will be more faithful to the source novel?
I would expect so. I mean, I'm certain that he and Kim Morgan, who wrote the screenplay with him, I'm certain that they, went back to the source material and not just the movie. I'm actually looking at a beautiful edition. I don't want to. This is like show and tell. There's a Centipede Press put out a beautiful edition of Nightmare Alley. And also Gresham's book Grind Show, which is interesting because of Grindhouse, but and Brett Wood, who is like the creative director at Kino Lorber, is a huge fan of those and is like a William Lindsay Gresham scholar. And Brett sort of edited and put these editions together, and they're spectacular. They're incredibly expensive. Thankfully, Brett's a buddy and he gave me these copies and I didn't have to pay for them. But they're absolutely gorgeous. And yeah, the book is much darker than the movie. And you know, I guess Guillermo del Toro is the guy to do this movie. If anybody who's making movies today has kind of that Carney show sensibility, it's him. So I'm holding out hope for it, as much as I too love the original film. So, but I haven't heard anything about, the writing of the screenplay, or whether it is the original novel more than it's the movie. The original movie was not that unfaithful to the book, really. It wasn't as elaborate. It held the through line on Stan Carlisle more than the novel does, really. But I have high hopes.
Yeah, and I'm kind of hoping they're going back to the source material as well, because I really like the book, and I think it'd be really interesting if they did that. And that's kind of my instinct of what they're going to do. I think more than just strictly a remake of the film, but we'll see.
I would think so. I would hope so.
And Anne mentioned she was going to a movie theater for the first time since the pandemic to see Andrew Thomas Jensen's Riders of Justice. Coincidentally, I had just seen the film as part of this year's online presentation of the Seattle International Film Festival. When Anne said Flickering Lights was her favorite of Jensen's films, I immediately checked it out. How did Anne like Riders? Anne liked Riders a lot. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to see it a second time in a couple of days, because I want to see it one more time in the theater before it leaves. Yes, I highly recommend the film. It's a really, it touches on a lot of really interesting themes about coincidence and how things unfurl in our lives, and also trauma and the way people process trauma. It's got, I think, a very beautiful but strained father-daughter relationship in it. And kind of, once again, which is common in his work, is that you have like a group of people sort of eventually making their own family, which is a recurring theme of his. And it's got some really great action, very dark humor as always, and also touches on some really serious things as well that were, so it's just that combination that he pulls off, and it's why I admire him so much as a writer-director.
Yeah, I haven't seen the movie, but just looking at the coming attraction for it, it seemed very much like Flickering Lights. Is this a crime movie, a revenge movie, or is this a comedy? It's
both.
Obviously both. Obviously it's both.
Yeah.
But that's a really great thing if you can pull it off, and pull it off with substance and good characters, because a lot of American movies play violent action and stuff for comedy and for laughs and things, and I don't like it, because it just seems almost weirdly sadistic or something, because there isn't much characterization involved in the American versions. But this seems, like Flickering Lights, it's character driven. It's really all character driven.
Yeah, and I think too, his violence is also, you see the stakes of violence too. I mean, both the emotional impact and also the reality of what happens with violence. So I think that's also something that American films tend to leave out, is the real consequences of it. And so that's, I think, a good thing, because I think that sometimes we sort of I just remember I had a brother-in-law that was studying to be a nurse, and he worked in an emergency room down in Texas. And I just remember him saying to me one time, gunshot wounds are nothing like they show in movies.
Oh yeah.
So I always appreciate that kind of, more realistic approach.
Yeah. And I have to ask you, since I haven't done it yet, how was the experience of actually going back into a movie theater?
Yeah, so when I walked into that theater, I almost started crying when I was getting my seat, picking out my seat, because I was just so overjoyed to actually be in the theater. I mean, there was barely anyone in the theater. And then Ted and I went and saw Quiet Place 2 on Friday when it opened. We went to an earlier show, and it was still pretty empty. So theaters aren't exactly packed, and in both those places they had seats marked out so that people weren't sitting too closely together.
Yeah, and it's weird. It seems safer to me to go to a movie right now than it is to go to a grocery store or something.
Oh, it's way safer. I mean, there's just not as many people there, and they're really careful about how they're seating people. So I would definitely say, especially if I now I'm fully vaccinated, so that's good. But I would definitely say, if you're vaccinated, yeah, it's a great time to go to the cinema before it starts getting really crowded again too. I mean, it's just sort of nice to to not feel so pushed and crowded.
It's amazing. It's so fascinating because I had to, because I'm going back to the studio this week, and I'm fully vaccinated, and I've had the proper amount of time since my second vaccination, but I still had to be tested.
Mm-hmm.
But because I don't have any time to get tested once I get there, I actually had to do like a self-test up my nose and everything, and FedEx it to a laboratory in Vermont. And then the results go to, I mean, it's incredibly complicated. And I have to have a little card in addition to my vaccine card. I have to have a little work permit card that's issued now by Warner Media that will get me into the building to verify that I'm okay and that I passed a recent COVID test.
Yeah.
Even though I have the vaccine card. So, wow, they are not taking any chances.
Yeah. Okay. This is from William. Anna Eddie, prior to my introduction to all things noir, I never realized how great William Conrad is. In all of his roles, I find him memorable and very subtle. What are your thoughts on this actor and your favorite performances?
William Conrad is absolutely fantastic. One of the great figures, big figures in American entertainment, I think, and I don't say that lightly. I have been meaning to write a profile about him for the Noir City magazine for several years, and I finally, fingers crossed, I will do it this year because I have a lot of really wonderful inside information, because his son, Christopher, who lives in Seattle, is a regular at the Noir City festival in Seattle. And Christopher's become a good friend, and he's told me a lot about his dad's personal life that is pretty fascinating. And, William Conrad and Raymond Burr were like the two heavies in noir. And how interesting that they both had these amazing careers in television as the leads, as good guys on TV. But, beyond that, William Conrad, I think he's the only guy who has, I'm sure I'm wrong about this, but has a star on the Walk of Fame in Hollywood for movies, for television, and for radio.
Yeah.
Because he was Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke on the radio. And, he's also the voice on Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he is.
The Adventures of Moose and Squirrel. That's William Conrad doing all those, all the voiceover narration.
Yeah.
And then, all those TV shows, right? Because, he was Cannon. He was Nero Wolfe. He was Jake and the Fat Man. He did all those shows on TV. But then there's all that incredible, the stuff he did in noir.
Yeah.
Which, he's one of the killers, for God's sakes. Yeah. But I really like him in Sorry, Wrong Number.
Yeah.
He has that really unusual character. You're not sure what the hell this guy is or what he's up to. Yeah. And, he just shows up in everything. And he's always good. And a couple of tidbits real quick. I don't want to give away everything that's going to be in my story about him in the magazine. But, he became a film director as well. Brainstorm, which is like a late era noir, mid-60s film noir. He directed that, along with the horror film Two on a Guillotine. I don't know if you've ever seen Two. You've seen Two on a Guillotine. That was William Conrad. But, in the 60s, there's a legendary story about how when Jack Warner completely lost his mind and went off the reservation and disappeared, William Conrad took over as the head of production at Warner Brothers. And he was so beloved by everybody at Warner Brothers and I forget how long this was. I don't even know if it was a year or less than that, but when he left, they thought so highly of him that they gave him the Maltese Falcon, the original bird, right? Which Chris Conrad grew up in the house with that bird on his dad's desk in the office, right? I won't go any further. You have to read the story, the eventual story, to know what became of that bird. But it was eventually auctioned off. Yeah. And so when you hear those stories about the Maltese Falcon being put out at auction, you want to know that it was the original one. So the provenance has to show that it came from William Conrad's estate at some point.
Yeah. And he also, in his radio days, really short-lived series called The Fat Man, and which was really based on the Continental Op, and is really fun. If you can find them, I think they're they're out on the internet, but they're really interesting shows.
And I believe there was a movie made as well. I don't think Conrad played the character, but there was a Fat Man movie that was sort of borrowed from the Continental Op. Yeah, I think that was 1950 or thereabouts.
Okay, and this one's from Robert. My favorite film last year on Noir Alley was Wicked Woman. I had not been aware of Beverly Michaels, and all I can say is, wow, what a doll, if I can say that nowadays. I was wondering if Eddie had ever interviewed her or met her. I would be interested to know any other info about her and what other movies she was in that you would recommend. It also occurred to me that she was not the only wicked one in the story. It seemed like they all were. And what about Percy Helton? What a great movie. Thanks for showing
it. It takes a special kind of person to decide that Wicked Woman is their favorite movie that I've shown on Noir Alley. But people love that movie. And yes, I did meet Beverly Michaels. It was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience. I showed the film at the American Cinematheque in Hollywood. This was a long time ago, 15, 17, I don't know how many years ago. We were doing a tribute to Russell Rouse, and we showed Wicked Woman and The Thief, the picture with Ray Milland, right? The really unique picture with Ray Milland. And imagine my surprise, Beverly Michaels just showed up at the screening. She just walked in, and trust me, you notice her when she walks in, because she was, I'm going to say she was 73, something like that. Taller than me, seemed like. She was a knockout. She just looked fabulous. She had like this platinum blonde pixie haircut, and she was she was spectacular. But she was very, very shy. And it took a lot of coaxing to get her to agree to sit for an interview after the movie, which was totally spontaneous and off the cuff. But she had so much she was delightful and a really, really sweet person. And she came because she was just thrilled that we were paying tribute to Russell Rouse, who was her husband. Yeah. They met making Wicked Woman. And then her son Christopher was with her. And he was a very, very prominent film editor in Hollywood. So the Rouse genes are good, because he was the son of a guy in the movie business. And then his son, and by Beverly, became a very prominent editor. He edited like the Bourne movies, the Jason Bourne movies, among many other things. But then she eventually left LA and moved to Arizona, and then passed away, I think, in 2004 or 2005 or something like that. But she was wonderful. That was really a memorable moment for me. That was pretty early in the whole noir festival thing. And in LA, that's the great thing about doing those shows in LA is you never know, you know, who's just going to walk in. That same night, Herschel Burke Gilbert, who was the composer of the score for The Thief, he just showed up.
Yeah.
So I actually had the two of them together that I interviewed after the movies, you know, talking about their work and Russell Rouse. If you like Beverly Michaels, I would say you can't miss East Side, West Side.
Yeah, I was thinking that when you talked about how tall she was.
Yeah, where I don't want to give too much away, but it's not a big part, but she makes the most of it.
Yeah.
It's pretty memorable for several reasons. And there's a Prison Break movie called Betrayed Women that she leads a breakout from a women's prison. And, you know, if you're a sucker for whip movies, women in prison films, like I am, you want to see that. You want to see Beverly Michaels slugging her way, you know, through that film. That's pretty great. And there's also a terrific movie called Crash Out, another prison break movie, which I think features one of her best performances. She has a couple of really great scenes with Arthur Kennedy that show her really acting. I mean, I don't personally think that Wicked Woman is a showcase for her as an actress.
Yeah.
It's really trashy, and that was the intention. But in Crash Out, she has a couple of scenes with Arthur Kennedy that are very poignant and very affecting. And of course, after she made Wicked Woman, she didn't do too much else because she basically left to be, you know, the wife of Russell Rouse and kind of willingly gave up her acting career.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, but the one thing I really do love about Wicked Woman in particular is just the scene where she's going back to her little room to relax, and she just like props her bare feet up on this ottoman, like cracks a beer, and she's so great in that moment because it's so real.
Yeah.
You know, and this really nice kind of slice of life moment of her just being like totally relaxed.
Well, the thing about Wicked Woman that's really interesting is it's clearly Russell Rouse and his writing partner, Clarence Green, are doing their version of a James M. Cain story.
Oh, yeah.
But their twist is that they're not going to blame her.
Yeah.
Right. She just comes into this town and she like can't help it. She makes men act stupid.
Yeah.
Including Percy Hilton, who that was the biggest role Percy Hilton ever had. That was funny. She told me that Percy Hilton loved that movie so much and loved the fact that he got to paw at her and all this stuff, that he had a 3-sheet of Wicked Woman in the living room of his home that his wife did not really appreciate because she didn't like him in that movie at all.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was his big, you know, Percy Hilton always felt that was his big moment on screen. he got to try to climb Beverly Michaels. You know, he's like this big and she's like this big, you know. So anyway.
Okay, this is from Arthur. I know when I see the name Bob Gett that the restoration will be first class. What other names should I look out as restorers of classic movies?
That's interesting because it was kind of rare that Bob Gett, who worked at UCLA and did some famous restorations like The Night of the Hunter and other things, it was kind of rare that people know a restorationist by name. That's like just not common because generally it's done through an institution that has the means to do it. So like when we work with UCLA, you know, we obviously have the Nancy Mizell legacy grant where the Film Noir Foundation every year gives a scholarship to aspiring preservationist or restorationist in the name of Nancy Mizell, who was the project manager for The Prowler and Cry Danger, the first 2 restorations we did. Nancy was the project manager. You know, she passed away, a very untimely early death due to cancer, and so we do this in her honor. You know, lately, Scott McQueen has been the person who took over doing that for us and supervising, you know, Woman on the Run, all the Argentine films, Too Late for Tears, which was a real challenge. You know, Trapped, The Man Who Cheated Himself, those were all Scott directed projects. But honestly, when you get beyond that, I mean, I know of Serge Bromberg, who has Lobster Films in Paris. Serge is a great restorationist. But, you know, generally it's the place that gets the credit and not an individual person. So, you know, that's, you know, I work with these people at, you know, like at the Library of Congress, I now work with a fellow named David Pierce. And I work with David. I can't say that David is the guy who does the restoration, you know, but he's the person that I work with to make these things happen, or that we discuss. Like, you know, David will send me a list and say, we got these things in inventory, and we'll discuss, like, what's the priority on this list? Like, of these things, how would you prioritize this? Because let's face it, you know, and these are not always projects that are done by the Film Noir Foundation, but I've now have a high enough profile that people will just ask my opinion of things because, you know, noir, people watch noir.
Yeah.
You know, so even if we're not restoring it, there are people, when they find it and have it and their institution can restore it, they might as well restore a noir because it's going to get more attention than the average 80-year-old movies, you know. So I don't know if that answered the question, but I gave you a few names there. But you really, it's like the UCLA Film and Television Archive, the Harvard Film Archive, the Library of Congress, Lobster Films in Paris, you know, the Bologna, in Bologna, they have the Cineteca in Bologna does a lot of restoration work that's fantastic. And then they put on their annual Il Cinema Ritrovato festival, which is all restored films.
Yeah.
So I would actually be going there next month if I could, but I can't.
Yeah. And also for people who live in San Francisco, Silent Film Festival here always has a talk by a preservationist on Saturday mornings, which is actually free. And it's just really interesting because they really give you an insight into the process of restoring things. And at least with the silent films too, those restorations tend to be collaborations between like different countries who in their own cinematographs in these different countries.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, and let me throw out the name of Rob Byrne, who works with the Silent Film Festival, and Rob has been dedicated to preserving silent films and basically putting up his own money and doing a lot of the work himself to get it done. So that's another one. Also, my friend Peter Conheim, who with the Cinema Alliance, Cinema Preservation Alliance, has done a lot of this work digitally. Because he has worked very closely with Nicholas Winding Refn, who has his website, BYNWR, which everybody should check out if they like trash cinema. And Peter restores a lot of those movies for Refn. He basically is like the treasure hunter. He goes out and finds the stuff and then restores it. And God bless Refn. He loves movies that everybody else has given up on and that thinks there's no value in them. So Peter's treasure hunts are like in old film exchanges and you know, laboratories and stuff, and not studio vaults where, you know, they're guarded. I mean, Peter actually gets into places where he can walk out with the films and then do the restoration. So and then of course there are the great people at the studios like Grover Crisp, who works for Sony, who has taken such incredible stewardship of the Columbia Library. Andrea Callis at Paramount, who had worked for both UCLA Film and Television Archive and the British Film Institute. And now she is in charge of the entire Paramount Film Archive and is kind of dedicated. You know, she did that beautiful restoration of Sunset Boulevard. She managed that, and a lot of other films as well. So yeah, there are like the studio preservationists and restorationists, and then there's like the independent group that go out and find the stuff and restore it. You know, they're very heroic. Anyway.
Yeah, and I just want to mention Kenneth Brownlow.
Of course.
You know.
Oh God, I'm going to forget his name now. He works with Kevin all the time, Patrick, and God, he's in Britain, and I'm drawing a. It's embarrassing. I'm having a senior moment. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, and this question is from Andrew, Ann, and Eddie. Noir is rife with bad romantic choices, even amongst the secondary characters. What in your opinion, is the most infuriatingly bad romantic choice in noir? For me, it is in City That Never Sleeps, when the mechanical man's fixation on Sally, when even the woman sitting next to her in her dressing room seems to be a better choice.
Wow. Let me think. I think it's kind of hard to beat Edward G. Robinson falling for Joan Bennett in Scarlet Street. You know, it's like, open your eyes.
Yeah.
Open your eyes, dude. That's not good. So I'll go with that one. How about you, Ann? You must have one in there that.
The most infuriatingly bad remake. I think for me, I think it's Crisscross. And I think it's just the moment where he keeps in his narration talking about, oh, it's just fate. But then he goes to the bar where he'd always meet up with his ex-wife. And it's like, well, that's not fate. That's making this choice to keep stepping into her life. So I get really infuriated with him in that movie. Just because,
okay, like, good. That's a good point, because I would ask the question, because it was a guy that asked this question, right?
Yeah.
And so the tendency is to think about like the guys who picked the wrong women, but are there ones where the woman picks the wrong guy? I think that's it, because, you know, Steve and Crisscross won't leave Anna alone.
Yeah.
And you know, that's like one of my favorite scenes in all of noir at the end, when she tells him, you know, get a life, leave me alone. You know, why did you follow me here? You're screwing everything up. But I'm trying to think of like bad choices where something along the lines of like in Sorry Wrong Number, where Barbara Stanwyck becomes fixated on Burt Lancaster and she pursues him, and you know that doesn't turn out well.
Yeah, that one kind of popped into my head. I feel like there's something really obvious that I'm missing. I mean, I guess for me, this isn't a noir, but you know, in Casablanca, like I honestly think she's way better off with Lasso. And it was so funny because that's like a joke in When Harry Met Sally, was that Sally thinks that's good, but actually, like, and it's not what I thought when I was younger, but it was like the last time I watched it, it was just when like the difference of when Bogart realizes that she was married and basically practically calls her a whore to her face. I mean, you know, I mean, that's basically what he's saying to her, whereas her husband, the first thing he says when he finds out about her affair with Bogart was, you must have been so alone. And, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. I mean, this is why these things exist in movies, to make people question their own feelings about this stuff, you know, because it is very complex. You know, do you want to go with the freedom fighter who may very well get assassinated at some point, you know, but who's the great humanitarian, or the guy who owns a bar? You know, I mean, you know, and smokes a lot and owns a bar, and, you know, I don't know. It's you know, I would choose the woman who owned the bar, frankly. You know, free drinks for the rest of my life. But you know, these are good questions. Anyway, so I hope we satisfied somebody with that one.
Yeah, and I just want to make one more comment about that too, about bad romantic choices also, is that I'm also really, what I'm particularly fascinated by, and I know we've talked about Gun Crazy so much, but, you know, which is not, these are two people that, God, they never should have met, you know, like in an ideal world, because it was, you know, guns and ammunition, you know, it was just, it was going to, no matter what, end badly. So that's also that concept of two, is when is really someone making a romantic choice, and then someone is just, they're just so pulled to each other. It's just nothing is going to keep them apart.
And then you have to ask, when you watch these movies, like, what is the true motivation behind it? You know, I mean, in Gun Crazy, it's kind of never spoken of, but it's insinuated that Bart has never really been with a woman.
Yeah.
Right. So he is sort of, that's it. I mean, that was his first love, you know,
Yeah.
if you want to call it that. And she really, it's not reciprocal, I don't think. She eventually does kind of fall in love with him, because she can't believe that there's somebody that feels this way about her, because she didn't really have those feelings at the start.
Yeah.
And then you look at something like Double Indemnity, where I don't really think that Walter feels much for Phyllis ever. Yeah. You know, I mean, he's just doing this. He's a terrorist, you know, he's just using her and she's using him. And, you know, he wants to prove that Keyes doesn't know what he's talking about and that he can pull off the perfect crime and all that stuff. I think it has very little to do with any genuine passion or feeling between those characters. Anyway.
Yeah, and I just one more thing. So, but in Gun Crazy, I think when you see that she's, or the moment that I really love, that I realize it is real for her, is just a scene where, okay, they're going to split up and take the money, and she's going to go one way, and he goes, and they're on that road, and they start to go in the opposite direction. They both stop at the same time, and she just runs back to him because she can't be separated from him.
The Roadster Ballet, yeah.
It's beautiful.
That's one of the most ecstatic moments in noir, and you hit it right on the head. I mean, that is the moment where she changes and dooms herself. She dooms herself in that moment, which is the point of it all, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that movie is, wow.
I just like, still, I'll never forget the first time I watched that film at the Castro. You were screening it, and I was so blown away by that film.
It's amazing.
I was entranced.
And it's also funny because when I wrote my book about that movie, it was so amazing to me to learn that nobody knew how to end that film.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I have read McKinley Cantor's every draft he wrote of that script. You cannot believe how horrible some of those endings are.
Yeah.
Right. Where Laurie ends up in a jail cell while Bart goes out on his own, or Laurie gets ground up in a thresher on the road, or something. You know, I mean, they just could not figure out how to end that movie. Then Frank King handed the script to Dalton Trumbo, and Trumbo sat down at home and read it and like figured out the ending instantly, because they made all that fuss about, Bart won't kill anything. Yeah. And then it's like, well, Bart kills her. I mean, that's the obvious ending. And nobody could see that except Trumbo on a first read of the script. It's like, well, he's incapable of killing anything, so he does it. Fantastic.
Yeah, because
people who haven't seen Gun Crazy, if I just gave away the whole movie. Your own fault. It's your own fault if you haven't seen Gun Crazy yet.
Yeah, and it was funny because just earlier today, my ex and I are still really good friends, and he had just seen Mank. So we were talking about how film is a collaborative process, and and he's a writer, and so he's also saying the importance of when you're a writer, someone else looks at your work, like in this case, right, and can see really clearly in a way that you can't because you're just too close to it.
Absolutely.
And that someone else can come in and really give it what it needs. Okay, so next question. Sorry, we kind of went long on that answer. Um, so this is from Pete. Hello, Ann. Hello, Eddie. 1, have you ever seen or do you own a Tijuana Bible? Do you know of any specifically noir related? Is anyone reprinting them? And you should probably tell people what a Tijuana Bible is, by the way.
Tijuana Bible are these little porno booklets, basically, you know, with illustrated. And they very often were raunchy illustrated cartoon things that featured caricatures of celebrities and movie stars and things very often. I've certainly seen them. A lot of them, I saw a lot of them reprinted years ago. And honestly, they, you know, I didn't feel the need to hunt them down and like collect them or anything. They're raunchy, not in a particularly creative way.
Yeah.
So no, I never saw anything that was specific to anything noir related. I'm trying to remember who like some of the movie stars were. There are some that are pretty obvious, so you could figure out, but that's all I got on that one.
Okay. 2, I'm very fond of the director Anatole Litvak, particularly his great run of crime noirs between 1938 and 1951. The Amazing Dr. Clitterhouse, Confessions of a Nazi Spy, Castle in the Hudson, City for Conquest, Out of the Fog, Blues in the Night, The Long Night, Sorry, Wrong Number, The Snake Pit. Do either of you have a view on why he isn't better known? Is there another key director with as many noirs to their names?
Oh, well, that's interesting, because I would not consider several of those films mentioned. I do not consider them to be noir. You know, The Amazing Dr. Clitterhouse and Castle on the Hudson. I don't really consider The Snake Pit. It looks noirish, but it's a, you know, it's a message film kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, you could make the argument that, well, if you consider Caged a noir film, then you should consider The Snake Pit a noir film as well. But the question as to why Litvak isn't that well known is, that's interesting, because, you know, he was at Warner Brothers, and he did get some of those were prestigious pictures with stars, you know, Warner Brothers stars in them. I think that Sorry, Wrong Number is his masterpiece. I think that film is hugely underrated, and it's brilliantly directed. But this happens, you know. Critical reaction to certain filmmakers reaches a critical mass, and then it becomes solidified, right? So people write about John Huston, they really wrote about Fritz Lang, but nobody wrote about Anatole Litvak.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were no critical studies of Anatole Litvak. He was very popular, Tolly. You know, he was good friends with John Huston, good friends with Billy Wilder. You know, so it's interesting. It's like what happened to Alan Ladd. How, you know, he was this hugely popular actor in the 1940s, and then nobody cared. Decades later, it was just like, yeah, whatever, Alan Ladd, you know.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because The Long Night, which is his most noir film, is almost impossible to see.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not actually sure why that is. You know, it was a RKO film, and for whatever reason, when Warner Brothers acquired the library, they never did anything with that movie. And, you know, it's Henry Fonda,
Mm-hmm.
right? A big star. Like, why didn't they do anything with this film? Now, whether it was a rights issue, because obviously it's, you know, it's based on the French film Daybreak, you know, that Jean Gabin made in 1939. But, you know, maybe that had something to do with it, that they didn't renew the rights on the story or something, and that's why it's so hard to see. But, you know, Litvak is a subject for you know, rediscovery, because he's a much better director than he gets credit for. Again, I could point, I have over on the wall here a picture of Ida Lupino and John Garfield from Out of the Fog. It's a beautiful publicity photo from that movie, which I like very much. But once again, that's 1941, and it kind of doesn't fit into the narrative of noir as it's been written. You know, so that's my best take on that, is that some people get left behind, you know. And I would say that obviously Fritz Lang has a more noir filmography. Robert Siodmak has a much more noir filmography than Litvak. Litvak, also an interesting aspect of this is Litvak made A pictures. And a lot of the noir films that we now celebrate were not necessarily A pictures. So that's why something like The Snake Pit, nobody would consider that to be a noir, because that was like a big message picture with Olivia de Havilland, you know, and it's like a big deal. And nobody, you know, even Sorry Wrong Number, for years, people never wrote about that movie because that was a big woman's drama starring Barbara Stanwyck, you know, and it's like, that movie is about as noir as it can possibly be.
Yeah, it really is. And I think also Louise Fletcher would very much have resented someone calling that a women's picture.
Yeah.
That was not her point.
Or Lucille Fletcher.
Lucille Fletcher. And this one, and one last thing from Pete. Can I give a big shout out to the hilarious Patrick Warburton, The Woman Chaser, one of the best noirish flicks of recent years in my view. And yes, you can. And in fact, we talked about that. I think it was in the last episode we aired.
I think so. Yeah.
So
he, you know, he would have fit in. That's funny. We were thinking big stars, but when people ask like who's a contemporary actor that could have worked back in the old days, Patrick Warburton would have been perfect. I mean, you can see him as a good-looking, like playing like all the roles that John Russell or somebody played in these movies. You know, I could totally see him doing it.
Well, yeah, because he could play comedy or drama.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, he would have been great because you could pretty much throw him in anything. So this is from Patricia. Patricia. Barbara Stanwyck's 1950 film, No Man of Her Own, is one of my favorite among her films. It's always puzzled me, how did the film get made without having the lead character punished for having an illegitimate child? So that's her first question, and she has another question.
Isn't she punished sufficiently in that movie?
I was going to say, I mean, she's blackmailed and everything else.
I mean,
so I think
she goes
she's
through
really
hell
punished
in that movie.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know the answer to that, but I am going to suggest that it's because it is the linchpin of the movie. I mean, without that, there is no story. And if you're going to produce a film that big, that's a Paramount film, is it not? No Man of Her Own. Yeah, it's a Paramount film.
Yeah.
Big studio, big star. They can get that through the production code office and just say, you know, it wasn't her fault. You know, she's trying to do the right thing and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then in the end, like, you know, there's a moral lesson to it. But man, I love that movie. I love that movie. It always gets kind of forgotten when people talk about the great adaptations of Cornell Woolrich stories, but that is right up there. And also one of the great Stanwyck performances, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean, just the opening sequence when she realizes she's pregnant and she goes to the apartment of the guy who's impregnated her, and she's just outside the door and it's like he won't answer, and she's like, you know, it's Barbara. So she just completely is just so vulnerable. And I think that also probably got it past the censors too, was that, you know, that she was so vulnerable, and it really feels like she was victimized. You know, this isn't like a Scarlet woman, so to speak. You know, she was obviously someone that was taken advantage of.
Well, you know, it's also interesting that The Prowler is kind of the same thing. You know, Evelyn Keyes gets pregnant. She has an adulterous relationship with this cop, and she gets pregnant. And there was a big discussion at the end, like, well, what about her? What about the woman? You know, she isn't punished at the end of the film, they were saying. And literally they had to argue like the extent of her suffering.
Yeah.
Did she suffer enough for committing the sin of having sex with this guy while she was married? You know, it's mind-boggling how that stuff worked. But
and also the guy was a manipulative sociopath, so there's that.
Well, in both cases, right? In No Man of Her Own and in The Prowler.
Yeah.
And I mean, let's face it, in No Man of Her Own, Lyle Betker is like the biggest bastard ever. Man, that guy could play rotten creeps. Yeah. And when and I don't want to spoil it. I really love, but there is a moment in No Man of Her Own that is one of my favorite Barbara Stanwyck moments of all time. It's when they go to the Justice of the Peace.
Yeah.
And he demands that they get married. And then the Justice of the Peace is performing the ceremony, and the camera moves into that close-up of Stanwyck when he says, "Till death do us part."
Yeah.
And she lifts her eyes, and it's like, we got a noir film here. You know? I just love that moment. Anyway, and see, I'm spoiling all this stuff for people who haven't seen the movie. I gotta behave. I know. I always have to keep on that.
So this is a continuation. Okay, so spoiler alert, and this is about No Man of Her Own. Also, when Stephen Morley's body is disposed of, the film is rather graphic in its description of what happened to it. Again, wouldn't the PCA have had their objections?
They talk about it. They don't actually show it. I've heard worse.
Yeah.
You know, the film we restored, The Guilty, has a scene where Regis Toomey explains to Don Castle how the body was disposed of. And I mean, it's the most gruesome thing I've ever heard in an old movie. I mean, it's horrifying. It talks about shoving her into the incinerator. And it's like, holy cow. But nobody, I mean, in that case, nobody cared because it was a B movie that they weren't paying attention to.
Yeah. But, and there's, I was just thinking also about a couple of Mann's films too, but especially, actually, is it William Conrad that throws the flaming drink on the woman?
No, that's Raymond Burr.
No, it's Raymond Burr. Okay.
It's Sherry's Jubilee.
Sherry's Jubilee. I was like, Jesus, I was so friggin' shocked in that scene. Like, I couldn't believe that had gotten on the screen.
But it's interesting because, as weird as it sounds, it's like very often they follow the letter of the law in these instances and not the spirit of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because you don't see him throw anything on her. It happens off camera. He actually throws the flaming thing into the camera.
Yeah.
He throws it in the camera, and then you just hear her screaming, and the next thing you know, they're bundling her off screen, right? So you don't actually see it. I know they wouldn't have allowed him to throw it on her in like a two-shot of them. That would not have been allowed.
Yeah.
So you figure out creative ways to work around this and keep that tone, that violent tone that they want. It's like, the stuff that Mann did was off the charts in terms of the brutality that he would get on screen. But when you actually think about it, what are you actually seeing? It's like George Murphy's death scene in Border Incident. It's like, what do you actually, they've set it all up so you know what's going to happen, but then you don't actually see it happen. I mean, it's like the shower scene in Psycho. What are you actually seeing? But once you've set it up that it's a naked woman in a shower and somebody comes in with a knife, I mean, you don't even have to show it. What comes next. So
well, and I still think from the classic period, the single act of violence that shocked me the most, and let's do it this way, I won't say the name of the film, but it's Barbara Stanwyck, and she's Western, and she's in her room, and her mother-in-law that she's not getting along, not mother, a stepmother, she's not getting along well with, because she's grown up just her and her dad, and this woman kind of comes in. And this woman makes the mistake of taunting her, and I'm sitting there going, I really don't think you should be taunting her. She picks up a pair of scissors and throws it in the woman's face.
Yeah.
And then they do this reaction shot.
You don't have to name the film now, because anybody who watches this and sees this setup for this scene is going to know what happened. So, you know, but there you go.
Okay. And this is from Michael. Sometime back, Eddie mentioned women whose works have been turned into noir films. I was immediately interested in Dorothy B. Hughes, since she wrote the book, which was the basis of Eddie's favorite noir, In a Lonely Place. My local library only had an online copy of her final novel, The Expendable Man, published in 1963. It was one of the best books I've read in a long time, a pure noir where the protagonist makes poor decisions, which put him in jeopardy, another cautionary tale about the evils of picking up a hitchhiker. I was particularly impressed in how Dorothy constructed the story around a couple of issues which would have kept the book from being turned into a movie in the early 60s. Has Eddie read The Expendable Man? And if so, how does he feel it could be filmed today?
Have you read it, Anne?
I have, no.
Well, then you're ahead of me, because I have not. It's in a pile of books I have, but one of the reasons I haven't read it is because it hasn't been turned into a movie. And I tend to read the books so I can know what the differences are in the films. So I have not read it. I've read, you know, The So Blue Marble and Ride the Pink Horse and In a Lonely Place, and, you know, but I haven't read it. So what's your take on that? You get to answer that one.
One, it's an excellent book, and I really recommend it to anyone to read, because it's really excellent. Here's the thing. The first part of the book.
No spoilers.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to do this.
I haven't read it.
I know. So the way they structure him picking up the hitchhiker and the beginning of it, he's like wary in a strange way, and you don't understand why. And then you get the turning point at the beginning, and you're like, oh my God, what the fuck was he thinking? Why did he pick her up? But it's based on who he is. I don't want to give too much away, because it's such a great turnaround. But
is it like somehow like Rendezvous in Black, that it's like a great book, but you can't really, there's certain things about the way the story plays out that you can't really do it on a screen?
Yeah, I mean, I really feel that way. I think it would lose a lot of the impact, because she's doing a very smart and specific thing, which is getting the audience at the time on board with the character, and then kind of pulling the rug under them. So, you know, and I don't know. I just don't think that the story would also work now. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I think it's brilliant.
So I have kind of a fascination with books that are unadaptable as movies, because I kind of cherish them, because they only exist as books. Have you ever read Charles Willeford's Pickup?
Yeah, that's
Pickup. It's like you don't even understand what the book is about until you get to the last sentence.
Yeah,
it changes everything.
Like, oh my. Yeah, no, that was that's a perfect example. That when it was like, oh my God, and it was just like, of course.
And it's like it's a little bit of a parlor trick.
Yeah,
you know, it was a more a deeper, more resonant version of what Mickey Spillane did in whatever the book was, Vengeance is Mine.
Yeah,
where at the end you know, it turns out. Now I'm going to spoil that one, that the person you thought was a woman isn't a woman, right? That was his big ending, but that's such a barracks joke kind of ending. But Pickup really is profound.
Yeah, no.
By the time you get to the end of the book, it's like, wow, amazing. And as timely, that book remains as timely as ever, but you can't adapt it into a movie. There's no way you can adapt it.
Yeah.
So now everybody run out and buy a copy of Pickup and read it. And it's a short novel. You'll see what we're talking about.
Yeah, and with Dorothy B. Hughes, that book that she wrote is also very timely also. But like I said, just the way it's structured, I don't think it would work. Yeah, I mean, there's just some books that, and it is, you're right. I mean, what you're saying about some books are really precious because they just really exist as books.
As books. They're just books, yeah.
This one is, let's see. This is from Brian in Toronto, and this is a couple things. Lizabeth Scott is very interesting to me, as to others, it seems. And Eddie seemed to confirm that she was having an affair with Hal Wallace, but she is elsewhere claimed as an icon of lesbianism. Confidential magazine usually got things right, it seems. So what was Eddie's conclusion? Was she actually bisexual and/or was Confidential wrong?
I like this notion that Confidential magazine usually got things right.
Yeah, I found that fascinating too.
That's kind of interesting. Confidential magazine paid for its information, but there was no guarantee that the information they were paying for was accurate. They just had a source that would say it was accurate. So tricky. I have my own sources dating back to my writing that Grindhouse book, sources who worked at Paramount, who confirmed the stories about Liz being, what was the term Confidential used? Fond of the baritone babes or something, ridiculously purple like that. It also is interesting to me that it's not either or.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she could very well have been Hal Wallace's mistress and still led a whole other life in Hollywood, because there were many clubs in Hollywood that catered to that. So it doesn't really matter that much to me. It was interesting to me that people who were there in Hollywood at that time that I happened to know, and I asked them about it, they confirmed the Confidential magazine stories. So I always felt that I couldn't understand why if it was true, why she wouldn't just own up to it, given that it would have made the last 20 years of her life much more enjoyable, I think. Yeah. I mean, she would have, but if all that was true, then she chose to keep her deep, dark secret, which is the title of a song that she sings on her album, which almost seems to me like some kind of tongue-in-cheek admission of something when she sings, I've got a deep, dark secret. It's just odd. Anyway, I will be showing Liz's last screen performance coming up on TCM in July, because I'm doing that neo-noir series, and Mike Hodges coaxed her out of retirement to appear in his movie Pulp.
Yeah, she was in that.
She is in Pulp with Michael Caine and Mickey Rooney, and Mike's stories of her nervousness reappearing in front of a camera are poignant. They're very poignant. She was quite terrified.
Yeah. So when are the neo-noirs playing again? I'm sorry. When are the neo-noirs airing again?
Starting it's every Friday night in July. Every Friday night in July. I'm doing it with Ben.
Yeah.
And we're co-hosting. Every Friday night will be 3 neo-noir films.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to say right now what they are because TCM has not announced the schedule. I know what they are, and it's a great lineup. But Pulp is one of those films, and Mike Hodges is the only director who has 2 movies that we're showing. So everybody's going to know immediately what the other film is of his that we're showing. It also stars Michael Caine. So there you go. I detoured from Liz Scott there for that, but I mean, I told you what I know about it. So
and just let people know too, we have on filmnoirfoundation.org, we have a TV listings page, and I do put up there everything that's noir that we'll be playing every month on TCM. So we'll make sure to kind of box those since you're presenting them with Ben, and so people will know which ones those are when they look through our TV listing pages.
Yeah, it's a really, really good list. I mean, there's obviously, I'm not anticipating, or I won't enjoy it when I get this flood of people saying, why didn't you show this or why didn't you show that? I didn't get everything that I asked for. I mean, I programmed it. Ben is just, piggybacking on my thing.
Well, as he always does.
He always does. But I programmed it, and I got most of what I asked for. I mean, it's 15 movies, and I would say that I got 11 that I asked for. And then 4 other ones were like substitute films that, we couldn't get the other ones.
Yeah.
And, I agreed to these other 4 instead. So that's it. Next question.
Next question. This is also from Brian. If Odds Against Tomorrow was one of the final classic period noirs, then what really causes the period to end in 1959 and not with later films like Walk on the Wild Side in 1962?
I Walk on the Wild Side has some noirish elements to it, but I'm not going there. I'm not going to say that's a film noir.
I think it's a pot boiler.
There are, I don't really obsess over, and when I find myself saying that, like, this is one of the last films of the classic era, I mean, I say that because there are signposts in the movie. Odds Against Tomorrow also feels, because of its ending, like it's the end of something. It's also the last noir film that Robert Wise made.
Yeah.
And he made so many during the classic era that there's a lot of things about that film that make it feel like the end of something and the start of something else.
Yeah.
Because of the presence of Harry Belafonte, it's like, hey, the civil rights movement is right around the corner. So this is, but there are obviously other movies made in the 60s that are noir, that are in black and white.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I'm doing this neo-noir series, and I have to explain to people, what does that mean? What constitutes a neo-noir, right? And a lot of times people, it's as superficial as, well, it's in color.
Yeah.
They stop making films in black and white. But then you say, well, isn't In Cold Blood, would you call In Cold Blood a film noir, even though it's based on it looks like it, but it's based on a true story. So, what is that? I don't know. Yeah. Or are they movies where the production code had finally subsided? And movies made without the constraints of the production code, are those neo-noir as opposed, is that where you can demarcate when it happened? I mean, certainly when you look at films like Harper, which I may be showing on TCM, that's just so obviously a new version of The Big Sleep.
Yeah.
Right? They're both made by Warner Brothers. They're practically identical, right? And one was Raymond Chandler and one's Ross McDonald. It's like, there you go. And a lot of people for a while thought that's what neo-noir was. It was just a color versions of the old style movies. But then you get to something like Point Blank or Get Carter, and it's a whole different way of making movies.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way these movies could possibly have been made in that earlier era. And those films are like totally subverting the older movies and announcing that we're doing this differently. This is a totally different thing. Anyway, that's a long question that I'm grateful for, because I've got all this moving around in my head while I'm trying to get ready for this shooting these shows. So
yeah, and for me too, neo-noir feels to me, neo-noir sort of indicates like a recontextualization of noir and stuff, and almost a reflection on it at times. Because I remember when I went, there's an Australian film called The Square, which I cannot recommend enough. I love that movie.
It's a really good film.
And I watched it, and my ex, who was not my ex at that time, and I were chatting about it, and I kept saying, no, it's a film noir. He's like, it's a neo-noir. I'm like, no, that is a film noir. I mean, to me, that is not a neo-noir. It's a film noir. That film could have come out of Warner Brothers in the 40s.
Yeah.
And to me, whereas like something like, to me, like Animal Kingdom, which is another Australian film that came out close to that, feels like a neo-noir to me. I mean, so to me, they feel like very different things, and it's rare for something like The Square to be made anymore, where it's just not commenting or you know what I'm saying? It's really just exactly like a film noir.
That's very interesting, because you notice in a lot of these films that are classified as neo-noir, the approach of the filmmaker is either to sort of lovingly do the film as a tribute to the older movies, but including something that they couldn't do back then. And I'm thinking of things like Chinatown, Body Heat is like that. And then there are the films that are clearly subverting the whole thing, like Altman's The Long Goodbye. I should be able to think of a few more, but it's really interesting because, in some ways, Get Carter is like one of those movies where it's like, holy cow! I mean, this is just as bleak and brutal as it could possibly be. Maybe something like The Friends of Eddie Coyle is like that. It's like a crime movie that is just so not like old crime movies at all. So there are those, Dick Richards' Farewell My Lovely is clearly his love letter to the, he's got Mitchum in it and the whole thing. But then I think Friends of Eddie Coyle was released the same year, and it's the total opposite. It's like a totally new way of doing this. So it's no one thing.
Yeah.
There's no one approach to doing this stuff.
Okay, and this is why is The Hustler from 1961 usually considered? Why isn't The Hustler from 1961 usually considered noir?
Oh, The Hustler. Yeah. Because it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's in that milieu, but it's not. It doesn't feel like there are a sufficient number of crimes committed, or, I don't know. I mean, I never consider it. I think of Psycho more as a film noir than The Hustler. I like the movie. I like the movie very much, but you shouldn't fall victim to the thing of, well, it's about the same time and it's in black and white, and there are crimes committed, because then you're going to end up thinking that, To Kill a Mockingbird is a film noir or something, and it really isn't. If somebody wanted to argue it and made a good argument for it, I'd be interested, but I'm not that person. So.
Yeah, and I think Psycho is great because it's really like, it's a film noir that turns into a slasher film.
Exactly.
Which I love. I mean, you can really see the transition into.
Well, that's how my book ends, pretty much. I mean, it cites Psycho as this is the landmark film that ended film noir, because the movie clearly starts out as a film noir.
Yeah.
And then, as I say, then Marion accepted those sandwiches from young Norman, and nothing would ever be the same.
Lastly, I love Roger Crawford, and one of my favorite films, Il Bidone,
Yeah.
which has Noirish elements. I was wondering about Eddie's thoughts on the film and maybe Knights of Cabiria.
Knights of Cabiria. Il Bidone, I can definitely see that fitting in. And I know that Fellini in his early days was kind of a noir fan, as most film directors are. So yeah, I would accept that. And you saw Four Ways Out, right? The film that I showed, and
I love that movie.
when we did the international noir. I mean, that was a Fellini screenplay. He wrote the screenplay for that,
Yeah.
which was clearly inspired by the Asphalt Jungle.
Yeah, very much so. Oh.
Yeah, and you know, still, I was very surprised that somebody didn't pick up on that and release that as a DVD or a Blu-ray or something. I won't go into it. It's a long detour as to how we got that movie and got it up on the screen at the Castro. It was
Awesome. You know, I mean, the film was great, but your introduction just before we screened that, and of course, you know, I had some of the, that was just like
that
seriously was like almost better than the movie. The
yeah,
story. It could be its own little short film.
How did they know where I lived? It really unnerved me. Anyway, I know we're teasing people, but the short version of that story is that we tried for months and months and months to get the studio in Rome to send us the film, and they never would confirm it. It was just, and then I had to find out, I had to search for digital backups to show, because the program had been printed and everything. And no joke,
Your story.
the day before the screening, I walked out of my house and the film was on my front porch in a cardboard box. You know, it was like, at no point in the process did I give anyone my home address. It was supposed to ship to the theater, but it shipped to my house, you know, and I'm like, okay, this is really strange.
Yeah, at least there wasn't a horse head in your bed.
Precisely.
And this is from John, and he asks Noir or Not, and it's 3 titles. Cape Fear, 1962.
Yes.
Body Heat, 1981.
Noir, yeah, totally noir.
52 Pickup from 1986.
Yeah, Elmore Leonard, yeah. A great forgotten John Frankenheimer movie with a couple of unbearable scenes in it, but good film. I like that movie. Yeah, Roy Scheider and Margaret, yeah, and that guy was a great villain. That creepy dude, the villain in that movie. But yes, I'm saying yes to all 3 of those.
Okay. Let's see. We received a very interesting query from Christy Sperling Snyder. This just too
Christy.
Yeah. Okay. This just too long to repeat. But the basic thrust of it has to do with whether or not we can feel sympathy for some Norse femme fatales.
You can feel sympathy for whoever you want to feel sympathy for. But I know that Kim Morgan, right?
Yes.
Co-screenwriter of the upcoming Nightmare Alley,
Yeah.
wrote a piece on that very subject for the Noir City magazine several years ago. Yeah, I mean, I always feel sorry. Well, first off, it's the defining the femme fatale. Like, who gets to do that? Who gets to? Because, you know, everybody refers to Gilda as a femme fatale, and I just don't see it that way. I have all the sympathy for her in that film and none for the guys.
Yeah.
And I kind of also feel that way about Anna in Crisscross, you know, Yvonne DiCarlo's character. It's like, she's just trying to get away from these guys.
Yeah.
You know, she doesn't really want either of those losers, but she's kind of trapped, you know. You know, Wicked Woman, we mentioned that before.
Yeah.
I have tremendous sympathy for that character, Billy, in Wicked Woman. And that, you know, in some ways, and then there are the true femme fatales. Like, I mean, you could even argue that Kitty not in The Killers, because she is a true femme fatale. Ava Gardner in The Killers is a true femme fatale. But Kitty in Scarlet Street, the Joan Bennett character.
Oh no, she's not. See, I mean, I understand why she's a femme fatale, but at the same time, I mean, she's gonna, she's
but
totally.
Johnny is holding her prisoner. Who knows what she really wants. That's I mean, it's hard not to think she's a bitch with the toenail painting scene.
Yeah.
That like, hey, she's enjoying this a little too much for my comfort, But I definitely feel, and I don't think it's revisionist in any way. I think that when these movies were originally made, I think that the writers and the directors had empathy, if not sympathy, for a lot of these characters, but the producers and the studio heads had a tendency to say, well, we're going to blame it on the woman. It's all a woman's fault.
Yeah.
I remember when they made Human Desire.
Yeah.
I know they were trying to figure out how to properly adapt Zola's story, and Jerry Wald said, the hell with it. We'll just blame it on the woman.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, like with Scarlet Street,
talk about femme fatales.
So I'm wearing an earpiece.
Oh, and she's
and
playing
then
with the cord.
Runs to the computer. People are wondering what she's playing with. She's
playing with the cord on the
cord.
IFB. Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, see, I have one of those too. You can see it buried in there.
But I was also going to say, because in Scarlet Street, I mean, she's totally victimized by Johnny. I mean, she's totally under his sexual thrall. I mean, that's really, really clear. And he just is basically, he pimps her out, literally.
Yes.
I mean, before they even, Robinson, he's clearly pimping her out. And then he's the one that's the driving force with all the stuff with Robinson as well. So I mean, he's really more the femme fatale really than anyone else in that picture.
Generally, the equation in these movies is the men want the sex and the women want the money.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of how it goes. Like, Mrs. Lewin Lockridge Grayle and Murder My Sweet. Claire Trevor just wants to get out of the gutter and live the high life, and she uses her sex appeal and everything to get what she wants. And like that's the coin of the realm, so that's how these things go. Are they detestable people? Well, they will eventually do something that determines that, I suppose.
Okay, so just to let everybody know, that article, Kim Morgan's article, is In Defense of the Femme Fatale. It's in North City 16, and you can buy a back issue of it at northcitymag.com. Just so you know. And that's a really, really great issue because it's sort of our women's issue. And so it has a lot of great articles like on Joan Harrison and so it's one of our best sellers of our
fantastic
issues.
Great.
This is from Alan. What film producer, living or dead, would you have wished to have interviewed on the stage at the Castro Theater?
Joan Harrison.
Yes. Director?
Robert Siadmak.
Music composer?
Wow, that's a tough one because they're asking about composers of film scores, I guess.
Yeah.
And I would obviously probably not pick. I don't know. That's a tough one. Composer. I don't know. Who would you say? I can't. I don't want to say. I'm trying to think of like, well, who had the most interesting life? Probably Max Steiner would be. But I don't know. I mean, it's so funny, because I feel overmatched when I talk to musicians, when I interview musicians.
I know.
Because I remember interviewing David Raxon years ago, and I knew that he was a cantankerous guy, and I didn't want to look stupid not knowing what he knows about film scoring and stuff. So I got my friend Charlie Hayden to do the interview with me so that he could talk music and I could come in and talk movies and all this stuff. And it kind of worked out. So I don't know. And you know, on the producer thing, I say Joan Harrison because we were just talking about her. And obviously I would have loved to really talk to Joan Harrison. But, you know, also Mark Hellinger would have been fabulous. But, you know, he died so young that, but you're asking me to, it's a fantasy anyway, right? Yeah. But Siadmak, definitely, because nobody talked to him. Nobody ever talked to him. So it's like, this is the guy who directed more great noirs than anybody else, and there's no real great interview with him. So that one is for certain.
Okay, this is the hard one, writer.
Probably Hammett. You know, I would love to have interviewed Hammett. I probably would not want to have interviewed Raymond Chandler because he's cranky and he would be drunk probably. Hammett would probably be drunk too, but he held his liquor a little better.
Yeah. Woolrich wouldn't have shown.
He would not have shown that. But, you know, there are also, you know, these great screenwriters.
Right.
Like Ben Hecht. Would I have enjoyed having Ben Hecht in conversation? I think so. You know, Jonathan Latimer. But you never know. With writers, they may be boring. You just don't know. But, you know, Hammett had such a spectacular life that, you know, I would like to know the truth about him, and I'd like to think that he would tell me. So
yeah. Plus, it would be in San Francisco.
Yeah, of course.
And what a better place to interview him than in San Francisco.
Absolutely.
And of the following, who is your favorite silent comic? Chaplin, Keaton, or Lloyd?
Keaton. That's not even close.
Yeah, me too. Keaton is just there for me as well. This is from our friend Doug. I really like the first two films directed by Jack Webb, the 1954 version of Dragnet and Pete Kelly's Blues. What do you two think of them?
Well, you're the huge Jack Webb fan, so.
Okay, so I have not seen either film.
Seriously, but you're a fan of Jack Webb, the radio Jack Webb.
The radio Jack Webb, yeah. So I mean, they've been on my list of things to watch forever, but believe it or not, I primarily just really am just super into his radio work.
I like the Dragnet movie. Dragnet movie is really pretty good. And, you know, it's tough for people now to watch Jack Webb and not just laugh. Because, you know, he did that taciturn, tight-lipped, clip dialogue thing beyond belief. But once you get past that, and you know, Pete Kelly's Blues, he loves his jazz so much that after a while, when you hang with it, you really start to see his love for the music coming through in the movie. And there's great performances in that movie. You know, they've got Peggy Lee and they've got Ella Fitzgerald in there, and it's pretty. Lee Marvin's in it. Janet Leigh is in it. You know, it's a good film. You know, I think its depiction of the criminal element is kind of lame. Yeah. But the music is really good. You know. Show it on a double bill with Altman's Kansas City, and you'll see the difference between a movie made, you know, in the 50s and a movie made in the 80s. Because, they're about the same thing, but they're two entirely different animals.
And on the subject of Cary Grant playing unsympathetic parts, imagine if Cary Grant had played the title role in Alias Nick Beale.
Easy to do. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I just showed on TCM recently, I showed The Uninvited, you know, the ghost story. Yeah. And it's so easy to see Cary Grant in any of those roles that Ray Milland played. I hate to say it, but as great as Ray Milland is, it's so easy to interchange him with Cary Grant in virtually any part. Yeah. Because they did the same thing. Yeah. You know, except to Ray Milland's credit, he played bad far more often than, you know, Cary Grant never did, really. I mean, Suspicion it's suspicion, but it's not really. And you know, if Cary Grant had allowed himself to play villains, that would have been really, really interesting. But I doubt that the audience would go for it. You know, there are certain actors, like Bogart was great because he could go either way.
Yeah.
And the audience would accept it, right? But Cary Grant, no. I'm just wrote an intro for this movie I'm showing late in July on Noir Alley, Cause for Alarm, this Loretta Young film, which is really fascinating, and it like suburban noir. But there's so many times in that movie when I'm thinking this movie would be so much better if you were suspicious of her motives.
Yeah.
If you thought she really was having the affair that her husband suspects her of, this movie would be twice as good. Not Loretta Young. No way. Loretta Young was a saint. Literally, she was a saint. And the audience really didn't want to see her any other way. So
yeah, and I think too, if people get a chance to actually read the novel that Suspicion is based on, and I like Suspicion, it's a good movie, but that novel is fantastic, and it is one of the best depictions of a codependent relationship that I have ever seen. I mean, it's the psychology of their relationship and her level of denial is phenomenal. I mean, it's a psychologically very accurate portrayal. I really, really highly recommend the novel.
I can't remember do you remember what it's called?
Oh,
I
gosh.
can't remember the title of it. I know that there are because
you can, and it's because he's a really good British crime novelist whose name is now escaping me. I read a couple of other stories that he wrote, and he's really good because he had two different names.
It's not Francis Isles, is it? No, I think Francis Isles wrote the novel that The Woman in the Window is based on, which is, I think, called Once Off Guard. Anyway, I'm sure when this airs, people will tell us what it is.
Yeah, and I'll type it in to I always comment when we live stream this, so I will put in the name of the novel.
And let's wind up. We've been going now for quite a while. I didn't
realize that either. Okay, so back in the 80s, I remember seeing a TV airing of Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid that included additional scenes of Bogart from In a Lonely Place and Burt Lancaster and the Killers. I've never seen that edited on DVD release. Any information on the version of the film and if it will ever resurface, Dennis?
Wow. I find that very hard to believe. I don't believe there were multiple versions of that. But I don't know. I mean, I'm just not sure. They got around all of I've told you my Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid story, right? Yeah. They got around all of the rights issues by using clips from the coming attractions from the movies, which are not copyrighted.
Yeah.
So every clip in that movie is from a trailer advertising the movie, which is pretty astounding, but it's also the visual quality of the trailers is not as good. And they obviously weren't working from original negative and stuff. So they did a very artful job of combining them. But then when they restored the film digitally, it sucked.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't restore the clips to match what they could restore of the Steve Martin footage. And it just didn't look right. And all of that was discovered at a screening at the TCM festival where Carl Reiner was the guest of honor. And I was sitting next to him. He's like, "This looks terrible. This looks horrible. What's wrong with this?" That was uncomfortable.
All right, so let's stop there.
Okay. But that intrigues me that this guy thinks he saw these other movies in the film, and I have no idea. I find it hard to believe that they would have done another version just to incorporate like two other clip. I mean, it sounds like there were deleted scenes or something, but I can't imagine. That's a tight film as it is.
Yeah.
Like, why would they change it? And, you know, and it wasn't like a rights issue because they never got the rights in the first place for those film clips that they used.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be like, oh, we didn't get the rights for In a Lonely Place, we have to cut it out, because they never paid for the rights in the first place. Anyway, okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know when this will air. I don't know anything, but I would suggest you feed Charlotte before she eats your earpiece. I'm gonna go feed Tizzy, who's I can hear crying downstairs. So that was fun, and so we have a few left over, and I've already I've seen more coming in. So
yes, we have plenty for next time. Do not worry about that. We have lots and lots of questions.
Good.
Yeah, and just to let you know, because after this airs, I'll be sending out our June newsletter. So in that newsletter, that's where we actually ask people to send in their questions. So if you'd like to send in questions for us to answer a little later in the month, then go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list, which is at filmnoirfoundation.org. And also, if you also donate $20 or more when you sign up on our email list, then we do send you North City e-magazine for a year. So
fantastic.
There you
go. All sounds great, Ann. I look forward to doing it the next time.
Me too. Okay.
And keep the questions coming. They're really good.
Yeah, I'm impressed with the questions. Thank you, everybody that sent one in. I appreciate it.
Okay. Take care. Good night, everybody.
Good night.